Welcome everyone. We'll get kick started in about a minute. We'll just let everyone come in. Okay, I'm gonna...
Sorry, folks. It's a good thing we had a test. My internet just went out, but I've hotspotted. I've got like 40 gigs, so it's awesome.
Fab. Right, I'm gonna get this session kick started. So welcome everyone. I'm Holly, I'm the MD of BIMA, and welcome to another of our BIMA Hangouts. These are kind of, designed to be practical, forward-thinking sessions that hopefully provide you with a bit of clarity amidst the lots of noise that's going on right now. Today we have, I'm really excited about this one. How is COVID-19 affecting our next generation? And it's kind of been born out of our Inclusion and Diversity Council, who are an amazing group of people who are doing a lot of really good stuff at the moment. There's going to be a lot of exciting stuff coming out of that council over the next 12 months. So before I hand over to Tarek and get this session kick started, I just wanted to give you a heads up on what we've got next week. And apologies, it's quite a few things. I didn't realize how packed out we were next week. So on Tuesday morning, we have a how to lead a sustainable recovery. So avoiding the climate bounce back, specifically around how agencies can start to bake in sustainability into their digital transformation offerings. So it should be really interesting. On Thursday morning, we have a senior leaders roundtable where people share their challenges, hopefully solve other people's challenges. On Thursday evening, we have our third an audience with, and this is with the AI and tech philosopher, Nell Watson. She closed our conference last year. She was phenomenal. So I highly recommend grabbing a drink and just sitting and listening to her for 45 minutes, because it will undoubtedly just blow your mind. I don't say that about everyone. It's pretty unique to Nell. And then finally, on Friday morning, we have a Martech showcase. So it's a partnership, a partner event with Friday Club London, where we have invited 10 new Martech startups to come and present. So again, a really good opportunity just to sit back and listen to some, really interesting new companies talk about their latest kind of tech and applications in the marketplace. So that's next week. But today we have some fantastic panelists on board from some of my favorite companies like Liberty and White Hat. And I wanted to hand over to Tarek Khan. So Tarek is VP of Consumer Experience Product at Coty. I had to look it up, but it basically owns all beauty products everywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah, they pretty much own a lot of the Max Factor, Rimmel, Gucci, Burberry, Wella, GHD, lots of household brands, but no one ever knows what they're.
Okay, so you're quite a good person to know then. But more importantly, I would say you're a member of the BIMA Inclusion Diversity Council, and you are also a brand new BIMA 100, which is great. So congratulations, Simon, as well, who's also a brand new BIMA 100. So I will hand over to Tarek to get things kick-started.
Thank you, Holly. So welcome everyone. I won't introduce myself because Holly's already done that, but I thought I'd start off by just mentioning something that I saw in the paper recently, where I read a journalist challenge the notion that we're all in the same boat. He wrote that we're not all in the same boat, we're all in the same storm. We're on different boats, some are more rickety than others, and I thought that was particularly relevant to, when we look at how COVID-19 is affecting our younger generation. Lots of people are having lots of different experiences, and we've got a really great panel of people here. to be able to talk about that. Shortly, I'll be asking them to introduce themselves, but just a little bit on the housekeeping. I'm going to be asking a couple of pre-prepared questions. You've also been kind enough to submit a few questions to us, and we'll also be getting some questions. Feel free to ask some questions on the live chat as well. There's going to be lots of things. There's quite a few questions coming through, so we'll try and fit as much as possible up until 11 o'clock. But let's get started without any further ado. So I'll ask the guys to introduce themselves. We'll start with Emily.
Hi guys, I'm Emily. I'm from Liberty. So Liberty is a future consultancy and youth studio. We only work with young people. In particular, we work with young people at the kind of early stages of their careers, so 16 to 24-year-olds. And I'm responsible for kind of overseeing all of our insights and impact, and have been doing a lot of talking to young people from our own network of about 6,000 young people, as well as lots of kind of client-led projects as well. So lots of useful things to share.
Great, thank you, Emily. And now, if you could introduce yourself, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I work for White Hat. I'm a business coach. For those of you who are not aware, White Hat is a tech startup, and we're really passionate about diversifying sort of entry into careers. So as a business coach, my role is to kind of oversee apprentices in business roles across the country. So I have about 35 apprentices, and a lot of them work in industries ranging from sort of like property to mining to technology, and even some local councils as well. So yeah, I've got a lot of insights to show from the lens of kind of like what the apprentices are facing, like boots on the ground, but also in terms of like, as a coach, having that solution focused approach and kind of giving them that toolkit to really navigate during this time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jamila, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamila. I also work at White Hat with Sarah. I'm their community president, and what that means is I work on any apprentice-led activity, and I also advocate for apprenticeships on a local and a national level. Before this, I was actually a digital marketing apprentice, so I use that experience now in my everyday role.
Okay, great. And Simon.
Hello everybody, I'm Simon Devereux. I'm the founder and director of Access VFX, which is a global kind of industry platform that pursues greater inclusion and diversity, predominantly over visual effects, animation and games, but it's starting to extend across kind of the wider creative industry. One of the biggest, I guess, impactful things that we run is a global e-mentor program that we've run for the last nearly 2.5, 3 years, and it has coming up to about 600 users. So I'm in contact with a lot of young people trying to get into industry. As you can tell, I'm not a young person trying to get into industry, but I can hopefully speak for all of our mentees. And I'm also on the BIMA Inclusion and Diversity Council as well.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you guys, and thank you for being here today. So we'll kick off the questions with really the title of why we're here, which is you know, the webinar is around how does COVID-19 affect our next generation. From your personal experience, how do you feel that COVID-19 is affecting the next generation of digital workers? We'll kick off with Emily.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting situation, because I think COVID has obviously highlighted a lot of things for not just young people, but for everybody across society at both a macro and a micro level. I think in particular for young people, there is much greater awareness about those kind of macro factors around inequality gaps. You know, I've been doing a lot of chats with like young people about food systems, and in particular support from businesses to employees is something that they're kind of picking up on a lot, because obviously they're exposed far more to kind of media and the stories, and they've got much more awareness of how responses are being played out. And then I think also at a micro level, we've definitely seen with kind of our network of young people who kind of skew more towards kind of creative and digital spaces, that they've had a kind of have been forced to have a moment of kind of self-reflection. And I think what's really interesting is that there's been a massive amount of resilience that has kind of emerged in terms of what we're seeing from young people. And it really reflects kind of what a lot of people already know to be true about this generation, but their kind of self-starting nature, their kind of ability to kind of seize opportunities as and when they come. So kind of 76% of people that we surveyed from our network have said that they've used this opportunity to try something new and to learn a new skill.
Right.
So they're kind of actively looking for things. So I think even though it's obviously a really negative experience, and we know the Resolution Foundation put a report out yesterday directly looking at the intergenerational gap and how much this is going to hit this generation in particular. You know, they've grown up in an age of austerity and economic downturn, and they're about to try looking for a job when it's going to be even harder than ever. But actually, we're finding that there's quite a lot of positive, there's quite a positive mindset about how COVID provides an opportunity to essentially reset and to rewrite the way things are being done. And I think that's a really interesting space to be playing from.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. Sarah, same question to you. What's your personal experience of how COVID-19 is affecting the next generation?
Yeah, I think sort of echoing what Emily was saying, I think there's like sort of like challenges on a macro level in terms of like, you know, the equality gap, and that's becoming a lot more sort of prevalent at this time, and it's kind of like glaringly obvious, like the sort of challenges that people face are in different sort of like social economic circumstances. But I kind of want to focus today more on the micro level in terms of the day-to-day experience of a young professional, someone in sort of like the early stages of their career. So some of the kind of things that have been identified to me just in terms of my role as a coach is kind of understanding the nuances of communication. I guess as a young person who's when they're at the start of their career, they're sort of somewhat greener than other employees, and you know, they have their line manager around them, they're amidst their team. If they've got a question, they can literally just be like, hey, I've got a question. And it's understanding, what does that look like when you're working from home? Also, what does that look like when there's a pandemic sort of happening, and a lot of like more senior people are sort of trying to strategize and thinking not just short term but longer term in terms of like sustaining their business. I guess the second thing is just about kind of echoing from that communication point, is like their opportunity and access to learning. So typically, if they were stuck on something, they'd be able to say to, you know, their colleague, hey, like, can you talk me through this, right? And unfortunately, some of them kind of sort of lack that forethought of thinking, oh, perhaps I can ask my colleagues to jump on a Zoom call and share their screen. And I think some even more experienced professionals wouldn't think of that as an immediate thought also. Another thing is just kind of working space. So having a conducive working space to actually carry out their job. You know, a lot of young people might still be living at home, might not even have their own bedroom, for instance, or have to work from their beds. They're eating in their bed, sleeping in their bed, working in their bed, having, you know, their leisure time in their bed. So that kind of not having that clear division between work and their sort of like social life, or the limited social life that we do have at present. So that kind of causes a barrier, not just to their well-being, but their effectiveness in sort of carrying out their responsibilities as well. And just, I guess, in terms of like a career development perspective, they're probably more susceptible to being furloughed or being made redundant during this time. And also there's a lack of opportunity for their visibility because they're not, you know, they're not physically there, but also may not have that kind of network within their team to be kind of be visible, like on a in a technological world when we're kind of all working remotely. So those are just kind of a few of like the sort of key challenges I think that young people are facing at this time.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because I think one of the things as a senior digital leader, one of the things I try and imbue in my teams is a sense of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable to be able to raise their hands when they're not sure about things, or you know, or even question things, or you know, wonder why things are the way that they are. And the worry is that in doing this sort of remote type working, that sort of people suffer in silence a little bit more, which is always a little bit of a worry. Okay, Simon?
Yeah, really interesting points actually. My take on, particularly from the mentee's point of view, is there's almost kind of like three different kind of person. There's your kind of student who is, a lot of students coming to the end of their studies now, and there's a real like, whatever level you're at, whether it's like full-blown university or college or somewhere like Escape Studios, where you know they're probably not going to graduate with their peers, and then there's this fear of of being forgotten, because they'll almost be mixed in with next year's kind of cohort. So almost a lot of people feel that their opportunities are getting minimized a little bit. So there's kind of the lack of motivation and the obvious isolation there. And then you also have your people just trying to get into industry from all different walks of life, trying to get in. And what I found on a more positive level of it, it's almost kind of evened out the playing field a little bit from a diversity point of view. So when you think of kind of like networking events and getting out and shaking people's hands and meeting people, it is the domain of the extrovert and the confident person and the charismatic person. And what the introvert has an opportunity now, the talent that whispers has the opportunities to craft their approaches, to use LinkedIn, other social networks are available, by the way, but use different online platforms to hone their approach, use all the resources that are available, like something like this webinar or all the other webinars that are out there, and start to get on radar. I would hope a little bit easier. I mean, there's a lot of noise, and there's a whole conversation about kind of breaking through the noise of everybody's online now, everybody's at home. But I think you have that balance of kind of everybody. I think that the theme for everybody is everybody feels like they're worried about being forgotten, and there's a real lack of motivation. But they're the kind of the two angles that I'm kind of hearing, is this fear of being forgotten on one side, but also this opportunity that presents itself where you get to be almost kind of ironically more impactful when you're not there to have impact, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the sort of side for the introvert, and as you mentioned, it can be a real opportunity. Jamila, from a community's point of view, what are you seeing as what's your personal experience?
I think from a community view, and from me being a young worker in the digital workforce, I think a lot of the things that some of our apprentices at White Hat and our community is struggling with is well-being and motivation, and having that drive to continue working 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Because like Sarah said, you're not in the office, you don't have the opportunity to speak to your team around you and like spin around in your chair or ask a question. You kind of have to go through a longer process of either emailing them or messaging someone on Slack if you have a question. So I think struggling with motivation, because you don't have that, like I normally have an hour and a half commute where I get myself in the mode of I'm on my way to work, I need to be in work mode, but now I just have a 30-second commute to my living room. So it's a much shorter time for me to get into the mind frame of going to work, and it's a similar experience for a lot of our apprentices. And one thing that one apprentice told me that she does is she actually packs her bag with her laptop, her notebook from her room, and then she takes that to her living room. So she kind of has that commute feel, and it gets her in the work mode. And I've tried this and it does work. So I would recommend, if you're struggling with motivation, give it a go, because it works. But also another thing that might be affecting people working in the digital workforce is technology. And sometimes technology doesn't always go well. Your connection might cut out if you're in a call, which has happened to me so many times. So it's just having that barrier of communication if you don't have great technology at home.
Okay.
Can I chip in now, Tarek? Sorry. I just wanted to echo your point about everybody's in different kind of boats. And I think the technology point's really key, actually, because I'm lucky enough that I'm in my home with my family, and we're not all using the Wi-Fi, we're not all on devices. But if you live in a house share as a young person, maybe there's 4 or 5 people in your house, everybody's battling for the Wi-Fi. These calls are redundant. You end up just kind of cutting out them left, right, and centre, and it's a real challenge. And then also on the tech side, for anybody working in entry-level roles in digital companies, is it's technology. I mean, it's not just calls. It's if you're working visual effects, animation, or games, and you're an artist, there's a real issue around kind of rendering and actually making the content, because it's great having all of these artists working from home, but then there's what's your setup at home, it becomes kind of an issue. I just wanted to jump on the back of that, but I don't want to take over either. So.
No, it's a really interesting point. I mean, like one of the things that you were saying, Jamila, about the really practical tip of actually just getting your bag ready, your laptop. I really like that. Does any of the rest of the team have any practical tips around how young employees can be a bit more proactive during this time? Have you heard of anything?
I mean, I know from the young people that we've spoken to, we found that keeping regular hours has been a real issue. So there's a big kind of sense, it's amazing, especially makes sense, right? If you think about the kind of age that these young people are at, they've kind of come out of a point where actually their lives have been incredibly structured through formal systems, whether that's, you know, education or being at home. Like actually their life has been very structured and very timetabled, and work is kind of another extension of that in a lot of ways, in terms of you're expected to be at your desk between hours, and you have the commute and you have things like that. But actually we're finding with lots of young people having no structure and kind of no, yes, you might have meetings that you have to turn up to, but actually you've got a lot more flexibility around how you work and when you work. But that's actually a real problem, and kind of young people in particular need structure and they need frameworks to work within. So we're doing a lot of kind of advising young people about making sure they put structure in place and they think about what that is. So exactly that point about packing a bag is exactly the same thing in terms of like making sure you still get up and you have that time in the morning to do something, so you're not just rolling out of bed and going straight to your computer, making sure that you're not pushing your evenings later and later and later, which we're seeing a lot of, is just that young people just going to bed so late and then it just completely sets them up in the wrong way for the next day. And so even things like, if you normally picked up a coffee on your way in, go through a ritual of making yourself a coffee and sitting down and having it before you kind of get in front of a computer. Make sure you have time for emails before you move into work, and actually trying to help them, I think, kind of compartmentalize and chunk out the day and what that looks like to provide that framework, because otherwise it kind of all goes to pot a little bit. And we're seeing a lot of that, and that kind of adds to a lot of the things that you were saying about the mental well-being as well. If you don't have structure, we're finding young people aren't eating as well, they're not sleeping as well, and you know, all of this obviously kind of impacts on mental capacity and well-being generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I think it's particularly, you know, difficult for young people, students, people just starting in the industry. There must be, this is the start of their careers. There's a huge amount of anxiety that's attached to these situations, and these are the moments that you know, for many people they've been looking forward to for most of their, you know, since they've been starting their education. It's like, what's it going to be like when you start work? And just as that happens, global pandemic hits. So it's not the best conditions. No. Does anybody else have any sort of more practical tips that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, so one of the things that I always kind of suggest to apprentices, kind of off the back of what Emily said about the structure piece, is just planning out their weeks and their days in advance. So having a chat with their line manager saying, hey, like, this is what I think my week's objectives are. What are your thoughts on this? And then scheduling the times, you know, within their calendar. So working in an hour sprint. So I'll say to them, like, okay, you've got this Excel spreadsheet you're working on, and it's going to take you about a week to do. Your deadline's Friday. So, you know, put in half an hour in the morning. You might have a team huddle or what have you. Half an hour, check your emails, then go get a drink, because that's what you would do anyway in the office. You'd go have coffee chat, I like to call it, coffee machine chat, and then come back, work for an hour, sprint, and then do something else for 15 minutes, whether that is going to speak to someone else in your house, or going on Instagram for 15 minutes, or, you know, walking to a different room, and then sort of doing that kind of like in sprints where possible, and changing where you're working. So, you know, sitting at a desk or table, if you have that sort of availability when you're sort of in calls. But if you're doing admin, maybe go sit on the sofa for an hour, or, you know, go sit outside in the garden if you have a garden, or on the balcony, or on your front step, you know, like just thinking about like diversifying your work environment. Another thing that I often suggest is something that we do in my own team internally, is having office hours. So I'll suggest to apprentices, like, host an office hour. So it's just an hour where you can invite, you know, your entire team. People jump on a call. There's a Spotify playlist going like really low in the background. Everyone's on sort of on mute or not on mute, videos on, and it's just minimized, and they're just there, right, on the side. And, you know, you can just have a chat and say, hey, like, what are your thoughts on this? Or just having separate office chat. So you kind of mimic that feel of what it would be like being in the office. So that's a really sort of handy thing that I always suggest about the, you know, the office hours. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, so just one point from me from that. From my point of view, sort of as a senior technology leader, one of the things I'd say as well is don't be afraid to ask your managers and your leaders to carve out some time to just talk about how you're feeling as well. Because the key role for a manager in this time is to look after their staff. And they would, and I know from lots of people that I work with, and you know, I deal with quite senior people, C-suite, they would want you to proactively go out and carve out some time. They can get distracted with a lot of different things, but actually the most important thing is how their staff's feeling. So it's really important, although sometimes managers might get caught up in a million and one things, it's always good to proactively say, can I just have half an hour, just to talk about where my concerns are, set up something regular, you know, and just touch in at any point. At no point do you need to suffer in silence, and at no point is anyone expecting you to know how to deal with this, because we're all, you know, trying to do the best with what we can. So just a point from me. Any other guys, have you got any other practical tips?
Can I chuck in one point around, it's actually building on, so I keep building on Jamila's points, sorry Jamila. But your piece around kind of getting into a routine and kind of packing your bag in the morning and doing stuff, you know, dress for the day and all that stuff. But I found that, you know, one thing I miss is the commute. And in my commute, I'd always listen to a really interesting podcast, or do some drawing, or I do something that just creatively stimulates me, that has nothing to do with work, but also isn't me staring at a screen. And I found that at the moment, everything's through a screen and it's exhausting. I mean, I've started a new job recently and I'm constantly on calls all the time. And I had a call with a colleague yesterday on my mobile, and I walked around the garden. I'm lucky enough to have a garden, but I just had a nice chat on the phone. It was so refreshing. It was like a drink of water. It was just like amazing. I'm not staring at a screen. And there's so many like interesting things out there. So almost build into your day, listen to something really, there's so many interesting podcasts out there that don't mean you're looking at a screen. Listen to something about creativity, listen to something about whatever industry you're in, there's a podcast there for you. Or meditate, or, you know, there's all these apps. So do something that is just chilling you out a bit, and just, because you end up being, to Sarah's point, you're just like maxed out all day. You know, it's very easy to get up and start working, and then you just lose track of time. And to Emily's point around structure, you're not, you know, unless you have a structure. So almost structure in your commute and do something if you have the benefit. I mean, I end up, my commute is really sitting with my son, kind of doing some drawing, which again is equally as powerful as listening to a thought leader on a podcast, but doing something developmental, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Doing something that, because, you know, we don't all work for companies that have the benefit of having L&D functions and even HR functions who offer this. And there's a lot of companies that are still doing remote learning. But if that doesn't exist, you're just doing the work all day, and it's a killer. So I'll just throw that in.
Yeah, really good advice there. So we've talked a lot about the sort of point of view from the young employees and some practical tips. It'd be interesting to look at the other side of the table and sort of get your thoughts and advice around how employers can evolve their approach long term, because I see this as obviously it's a challenge in many ways, but for employers, I also see this as an opportunity. If they handle this properly, look after their staff, look after their next generation of workers, it imbues a sense of belonging within those workers. And if they genuinely feel like they're cared for, protected, and feel safe, you tend to have a much happier long-term workforce. So it'd be great to hear from you guys how you feel employers should be evolving their approach for strategically long-term. And I'll throw that out to Jamila in the first instance.
I think it's a really good point. And I think from all this, there's something that we can learn. What White Hat has done within internally, but also with our apprentice community, is move everything online. And we did that in 10 days. And before that, we kind of didn't really deliver a lot of things online. All of our events were in person. Most of our coaching sessions were in person, but now everything is online. So I think something that we can learn from this is, once everything does go back to normal, maybe we can keep some stuff online. It's like Simon said earlier, the online world is like an introvert's dream. So before, we didn't really see many apprentices coming to our in-person events who might have been more introverted, just because it's a more intimidating place to be. But if we're continuing to have both in-person and online events, then we're kind of tailoring our opportunities for all kinds of apprentices and opening our opportunities for a wider group in our community. So yeah, I think going forward, there's like just making sure that we're not completely stopping everything that we've been doing over the past 6-7 weeks and just integrating it into our wider plan.
Okay, cool. So open it up to everyone else. How do you have any thoughts on how employers can involve their approach?
There's a real responsibility. Sorry, Emily. After
No,
you.
no, go.
No, please. I've spoken off. Go on.
Oh no, well, I was just going to say, I think there's an interesting point about language that's being used. I think there's a lot of talking about going back to normal, and it's like, actually, I don't think we should be thinking that way, and young people don't think. The young people I've spoken to, at least, don't think we should be thinking that way at all. This is not about how do we revert back to what was. It's about how do we move forward, and how do we think about the things that we take. Like, this has given businesses an opportunity to look at what works and what doesn't work, and I think it's about how you move forward from that point. So I think exactly in terms of what Jamila was saying about how do you integrate more digital aspects, young people that we've spoken to, particularly looking at what they want from employees, there's a lot about expectations around, I just think that this will be more of what it is like to work remotely. So yes, there are the challenges that Sarah outlined in terms of them being able to navigate that, but they also understand that this is probably the way it's going to be. And I think you can think about that from a senior leadership perspective. Spoken to a lot of businesses and again at C-suite level, and there's lots of people who are like, hey, I didn't know I could work like this. Why would I necessarily want to go back when I've been able to spend more time with my family and not have to do the commute the whole time? So I think there will be a massive shift across industries and across businesses, and that you kind of need to start with accepting that rather than going, oh, we'll get things back to normal. Like, we as a business are having to do that. So Liberty is a co-working space, a physical co-working space. That is how we build a lot of our relationships with our young people. And we're now talking about, well, that might not actually be the way we have to move forward anymore. So what do we do about that? Which is a huge, daunting conversation for us to have when we've spent 18 years doing it. But it's really important. And I think these are the kind of questions that senior leaders need to be asking themselves. And I think in particular from an HR perspective, and you kind of talked about this, Tarek, in terms of the psychological aspect, I think it's looking at what culture looks like and how do you maintain culture in a digital way, which can feel really, really challenging. But actually, we live in a connected society because of digital. So how do you tap into that? And how do you create the space for people to still connect and to still build relationships within a workspace without it always feeling like work? So we do, a thing where we have every day at 2:30, we have like tea time where it's open up for our employees, but also to our network. And you can just log in and basically have a cup of tea together. We now have a thing every week as part of our community where we're running basically just open forums, because one of the things that we're realizing is that obviously right now people aren't communicating in the same way and they're not kind of connecting with people with similar passions or being able to share and just kind of collaborate and have ideas and bounce things off. So like, it doesn't have to be complicated or structured. It's just allowing there to be a forum for people to come together and connect and communicate. And I think there's a lot of concerns about collaboration and what does that look like in a digital world. And actually there's what's really interesting, I think, from a creative perspective, is that this has unlocked quite a lot of creative thinking. You're having to think differently, you're having to think around things, you're having to think more solution and based in a more innovative way. And actually it's how do you tap into that and encourage people to share and just giving them the space to do that. And I think it's exactly that point kind of everyone's been making, is like, work isn't always deliverables. It's not always what's the output and I have to be in front of a screen and I have to be hitting an objective by a set time. It's how do you have conversations and how do you share and how do you use things like Google Docs and Slack and all the kind of platforms and technologies that exist that enable you to do that, and kind of think about how you implement them from a cultural perspective rather than from a project delivery perspective.
Yeah, that's really important. That's really important, how you do that. I think once we move away from something where there is a lockdown, it would be nice that there's certain elements of of what we've got now that are kept. The best bits are kept. I think there's, obviously there's still a need for those serendipitous interactions within companies, but there's also a need to incorporate that within the sort of digital realm as well. And I know lots of different companies that are doing that, and they've been really successful. And to Simon's point, it's meant that you've got some people that are maybe a little bit more introverted, that have been getting more involved in these sort of cultural activities digitally than they would have previously. Cool, really good. Anybody else got any ideas around how employers should evolve their approach long term?
One of the things I was going to say, like, I'd like to touch firstly on Emily's point in terms of sort of like understanding or establishing what culture looks like in a digital way. So kind of just echoing all of the like great suggestions in terms of, you know, how you can engage your workforce. I think as well is like thinking about, you know, how can you maximize the tools at our disposal to kind of encourage that collaborative approach. So thinking about Zoom, so as Jamila mentioned, we shifted to online delivery in 10 days. We used to do a whole day masterclass that's now being condensed to like really interactive webinars. So like sort of training people so they're able to use tools like Zoom. So, you know, you can put people in breakout rooms and, you know, you can have an interactive screen where people add their comments and have that kind of collaborative working. Like we have those digital tools at our disposal, so like really maximizing those. And also just in terms of you know, culturally having lunch and learns, there's probably a lot of people in your team who can add value. And as Emily said, it's not just about output in terms of like, you know, the goals, objectives. It's also about like, how do the people that work with me feel, and how they feel it impacts their productivity in these outputs. So, you know, having lunch and learns where it's either something practical to do with the role, or even things like, I don't know, someone might be an expert at baking banana loaf or something like that, and having like a banana, like make it with Sarah banana loaf hour or something like that. Like, how can you be interactive throughout the day? And also in addition to that, on a kind of more sort of basic everyday level, is just spelling out the small things and spelling out the basics. So things like, oh, you know, when you're working from home, like in terms of your Slack status, like allow it to kind of reflect what you're doing. You know, don't be afraid to have it on do not disturb, or have it on meeting, or have it on lunch, so people are aware. And that kind of visibility piece in terms of your calendar, like feel free to have breaks, plug those in your calendars that people just are aware if they need something urgent from you, and just kind of putting in a bit more additional touch points. So some line managers might meet with their reports once a fortnight or something, but you know, during this time, perhaps, you know, 2 weeks is a long time during this period because things change so rapidly. So maybe having more additional touch points that either focus on personal development, so people don't feel like that's been kind of put on hold, and also things that focus on well-being, so people feel like they're actually cared for and they're not just some sort of like asset in this kind of big sort of mindful that is sort of work. So yeah, those are the kind of main tips. And I guess the final thing is about compassion. So as a manager, having self-compassion for yourself, that you're not always going to have all the answers and solutions, and being forthcoming with your team, because as you rightly mentioned, Tarek, at the beginning, we're all in the same storm, even though we're not in the same boat. So like, we're all kind of seeing around us the experience it's having on different people as well, but also kind of applying that same compassion to your team, and understanding that not everyone's going to be in the same boat as you, particularly if they're younger. There might be like, as Simon mentioned, in a house share, or sort of living at home with like several siblings, or being a carer for somebody in their home. So just kind of having that self-compassion for your team as well.
It's taking that empathetic approach, right? And just trying to put yourself in these people's shoes, and trying to get an understanding of, you know, how difficult it is for some people on so many different levels. And hopefully, if we're, to your point, if we're communicating more and interacting with our managers a little bit more, then that they're able to sort of get more information and understand what pressures the younger workers are facing, and they can sort of cut their cloth accordingly. Okay, great. We've heard from pretty much everyone on that. Simon, did you have anything that you wanted to add to?
Just a quick one. Sorry, wait there.
He's ordering his cup of tea.
Sorry, my wife's hoovering in the background. You're going to have to listen to the hum of the vacuum cleaner going. I was just going to talk about leadership, and I agree with everything that's been said, but there's a real responsibility on leadership to obviously manage the balance between internal comms and pastoral care that everybody said, like checking in with people, but also ensuring that town halls are done properly and information's relayed, which feeds into all the points raised around maintaining culture. But there's also a piece about being an employer of choice as well. And there's all the people on the call, for example, who are trying to get into industry and who are trying to get in. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity for industry to really embrace agile working and flexible working, because I've been a victim of the side eye when I've had to leave early to pick my kid up from school or work from home. And I think that this is a living, breathing case study for flexible working now, which can't be ignored when we return back to the new normal, whatever that looks like. But there's a real kind of opportunity to become like I said, an employer of choice that really does embrace it, and how you push that out, because there's loads of people trying to get into industry worried about there not being opportunities. Yeah. And actually, if you are a working mum, or you need to work flexibly and are super talented, but you're worried that you're not going to be taken seriously, there's almost an opportunity now for you to be absolutely taken seriously for a role, because agile working is the norm now, and it's going to be the norm forever. I mean, if I look at my old company, which was a visual effects studio, there was a real concern back then that, how are we going to set up an artist to work from home? And now the entire artist population is working from home. So I think it's quite exciting for the next generation coming in. And when I talk about next generation, I'm talking about lots of different ages. It's not just young people.
Yeah, I see that. For me, when I work, I've worked with quite a few different businesses, and what you tend to notice is the companies that have been around for quite a while, they obviously find it more difficult they have a lot of these hierarchical structures and ways of working that these managers have seen be successful in their time as they've grown up through the ranks, and they've expected the same. But when you look at some of the newer companies that are digital native, that have been sort of born in the internet and built their practices and governance in what works now, it's becoming more and more the de facto way of working, which is an agile way of working, less about presenteeism, which I think is a really important point as well. Making sure and actually sort of putting the focus on the value that you're getting out of your team, rather than whether they're turning up to an office from 9 to 5 and just being there. It's great. Okay, some really useful stuff. Have you seen? I mean, I think we've covered quite a lot of this already, but have you? Are there any initiatives that you've seen working well? I think we've talked a lot about what we've seen working well within our own organizations, but within other companies, are there any other particular companies that you've seen that you'd like to sort of highlight for doing well, or practices that they've done that you think are elements that you'd like to share? Anyone?
Yeah, I've got an example. I think to kind of going back to the very beginning and thinking more specifically about, I guess, young people and young talent, rather than kind of for businesses. Obviously, we know that there is right now is a really acute moment in terms of lost apprenticeships, lost placements, lost jobs. And I think this kind of also goes to businesses and thinking forward. How you choose to respond right now also sets you up in terms of how people want to work with you down the line. You're a brand, so how you respond plays into that. And I think there's an example that I think is really interesting. So IDEO, who are a kind of open innovation business, they had a lot of kind of young talent that they were about to start with a load of placements, and they've had to pull it because of kind of furloughing and finances and all of that stuff. But what they've done is actually they've kind of created a way of promoting those young people externally. So rather than saying, we're really sorry, we can't give you an opportunity right now, we can't support you, they've said that we can't support you in terms of working with us directly, but we will do everything in our power to elevate you and promote you across the industries, because we think that you are brilliant, and that's why we wanted to work with you. So they've created kind of shared documents where they've kind of listed out the young people that they were meant to be working with. They've directed to their portfolios, they've kind of posted it quite far and wide. They're actively pushing because they think these young people deserve opportunities, and I think that that's incredibly important is how you choose to respond to the people that aren't just in your business but are also outside your business can make a massive difference.
And that's where I completely agree with you. I think it's actually, although obviously there's many challenges and hardships, there's a lot of opportunities for companies in the way that they conduct themselves, in the way that they treat their young staff, and in an authentic manner as well. Not in a way that what I don't mean is an opportunity to sort of PR yourself and working in a certain way. But I think people, particularly young workers coming into the industry, can sniff out bullshit quite easily.
Yeah.
And if you're doing things in an authentic way, and it sounds like IDEO have always been a company that's been at the forefront of thinking in creative ways, then that really resonates with people, and you're really setting your stall out for how you treat your employees, even when it's interesting because actually when you look at it, how companies treat their youngest employees is probably going to give you the best indication of how what they really are like, because these are people that have recently come into the business, and you could argue that that there's going to be less friction for them if they remove them out of business compared to senior managers and people like that. So it's really about how do they create the due care and attention to making sure that if they do have to lay people off, they do it in a caring way, but also making sure that you've got these companies that know that they're not just boom or bust, and they're a lot of the people that are ramping up their initiatives around apprenticeships and internships, they really are thinking about the future and knowing that this will be a great opportunity moving forward. Okay, so that was brilliant, Emily. Is there anyone else that's got any examples from other companies that they'd like to share with us?
I'd like to sorry, that's a shameless plug, but the Access VFX e-mentoring platform that we run.
Yes.
Only because for two reasons. One is it's a great, it's become a really good crutch for people trying to get into industry at the moment, because it's a completely inclusive, free platform that we offer, managed through a Slack channel, where you can connect with an industry professional as long as you want to, really, to kind of get advice, to share your work, to stay connected and build a network. Yeah. Also, from a mentor point of view, for anybody at whatever level can sign up for free as well, and almost hone their leadership skills. Like if you're not a traditional leader or manager, mentoring has become this really great tool to be able to kind of set goals and support somebody on their career, particularly at the moment. And we've seen a surge in the last kind of 5 or 6 weeks. I think we're about 25% increase in the amount of users. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we're upwards of nearly 600 users on the platform now, and it's fully sponsored by our friends at Foundry. And so we can offer it for free on a global basis. And we have chapters in America and Montreal as well as the UK. So your mentor can come from anywhere in the world. So it's a really, really nice way to stay connected, to get support, to even just check in on somebody. And it's something that I encourage both the mentees and mentors to sign up for. It's completely free. I don't get any revenue from it. It's a non-profit. If I'm not here, I'm plugging it, but for the right reasons, hopefully. But I just wanted to throw that in there as a kind of potential, not necessarily solution for people, but it's another.
And how do people sign up for that?
They go to the website. So it's accessvfx.org/mentors. And then there's the 2 buttons, and it's run by a third party, government endorsed third party. They do all DBS checks on the mentors. And actually we can mentor people as young as 13 years old. So it's a really nice opportunity anyway, outside of all this COVID nonsense. It's an opportunity just to build your network, and there's a lot of really, really committed mentors as part of that cohort, and it continues to grow. It's getting more expensive to renew, if anybody's listening from the team, but yeah, it's been running for about 2.5 years now, and it's just so proud of it. It's such a great way to give back.
Sounds fantastic. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left before we wrap things up. Is there anything that anyone wants to, any areas that we want to to talk about or share that we haven't necessarily covered yet? We've got about 3-4 minutes. Is there anything anyone that wants to talk about?
I had a look in the Q&A and there was a question there on sort of like our panelists worried that opportunities are disappearing for young people who are trying to get into work. And I think so some advice that I give to people who are already in work as well, who are in their early stages or without work, is thinking about what do you want to offer during this time, and also what do you want to offer when we've kind of established this new normal, as Simon I think rightly coined the phrase there, and just thinking about in terms of like as a person, in terms of your skills, in terms of your career ambitions, thinking about what it is that you want and thinking, kind of getting to that resource of the why, and then sort of exploring and thinking what is out there for me. As everyone sort of alluded to, due to the fact that we can't actually physically sort of like meet, everything's online, so getting access into a Zoom call is far easier than getting access into sort of like a corporate event or something, or high sort of like high level security or what have you. Whereas with Zoom, it means that with the internet, it means that there's less barriers to kind of meeting and accessing people. So now more than ever, it's incredibly important to be proactive and take ownership in driving your learning and development forward, whether you're in employment or not. But also having that sense of self-compassion. Being an asset to an organisation isn't just about the knowledge that you have to bring, because knowledge can be taught. It's about the skills, and it's also about your ability to kind of navigate through challenging times and being able to say things like, oh, actually, I'm not great today. Perhaps I should do this. And also being able to be proactive as well. So I think, yeah, just kind of taking ownership and being proactive and driving your learning is what's going to set you apart right now.
Just connected to that, I also feel like there's a responsibility for businesses to support in that. You know, there is I think, like, you know, staff being furloughed, and people do have a little bit more time on their hands. So exactly as Simon said, in terms of giving time as a mentor, there's also ways you can give time in terms of helping these young people actually have practical stuff. So I think a big thing is, like, right now the market isn't what the market is normally because of everything that's going on, but there's no reason why you can't use this as a time to develop skills and to actually get practical hands-on experience. And something that we're pushing a lot of our clients, and these are kind of big tech companies like Google, Facebook, people like that, is actually how do you kind of set up, whether it's online sprints, setting briefs, like actually giving young people tasks to respond to that they would in a normal working environment. So, and we know, for, you know, young people are incredibly bored. Like 70% of the people that we surveyed in our network are like, I'm really, really bored. Give me something to do. And they're looking for stuff. So I think actually thinking about, as a business, what kind of briefs can you share, what kind of things can you do in terms of like setting that externally as challenges that give young people real tangible case studies that can go into a portfolio, can go into a CV without them actually having to had a proper work placement. I think there's a real responsibility there, and I think it just fosters creativity and innovation, and you learn a lot, and it builds a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about in terms of connections.
Great, thank you, Emily. Okay, cool. So it's about time to wrap it up. Thank you, panel, for a really insightful session. I personally learned a lot. I think there was lots of really insightful points of view, but a lot of really practical tips as well that hopefully the audience, and I know myself, we can take on board and use as we try and navigate this storm. I'm going to pass it over to Elise for the last couple of minutes, who just wants to talk about a few bits and pieces, but I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and hope the rest of your week goes well.
Yeah, huge thank you to all of the speakers and Tarek for hosting, and thank you for joining. I will share all the links in a follow-up email. This has been recorded as well, so I'll share the link to YouTube so you can share it with your teams. Have a good weekend, and I hope to see you online shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.